So, to be clear, the intent of this is not to get everybody to change their views of the world and not be capitalists. The intent of this is to get people to think that there are other things out there and there are some choices we can make. This whole session is about choices, and this was a pretty good example of choices that certain companies are making, even NGOs are making. The answer to the question about skepticism, by the way, from my experience, people are skeptical of putting their hands in their pockets for checks because they don't know where it goes. If you send a pair of shoes, you kind of know that the pair of shoes has a good chance of getting through. So actually the skepticism is actually the other way around from what I've seen. The next speaker is Jez Frampton, and Jez is the CEO of Interbrand, a proud sponsor of this conference too. So Jez, please come up.
Good afternoon. It is wonderful to be here, and it is a wonderful world that we live in, is it not? And I'm going to spend some time now talking to you about what we've called the wonderful world of choice. One of my colleagues once actually summed up the trouble of buying a car nowadays as the misery of choice, because there are so many different options available to us. And it used to be so much easier in the old days when Henry Ford said you can have any colour you like as long as it's black. But the way that we actually live our lives and the behaviour and the behavioural changes that are going on around us due to changes in the digital world and the world around us and our awareness of what's going on in the world around us, which we just learnt a lot about in the last 40 minutes or so, are making significant differences to the way that we choose. And choice is one of the fundamental things about brands. They do actually make our lives supposedly a little bit easier for us. They send promises, messages, set expectations which make our lives easier so we can get on with the things that we're really interested in doing. But all of that is changing as well. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how choice is changing and then to touch on some of the elements to do with what we would call corporate citizenship. And we've been spending quite a bit of time talking about already this afternoon. This is how, at Interbrand, we define a brand. A brand is a living business asset, brought to life across all touch points, which, if properly managed, creates identification, differentiation, and value. Fairly all-encompassing definition, the most important thing being there, of course, living. Many people used to think of brands as something that you tinkered with once a year and hopefully it would go away and then the brand police would look after it and back you came. But of course, as customers, as consumers, as choosers every day, we know that that's not really the case. We were always influenced by the myriad things that happened within markets, within competition, and of course what our friends told us. I remember in one of my very, very first roles as a planner in an advertising agency, spending a good evening one night looking through a number of different campaigns on the instruction of one of my bosses, saying, can you tell me which one of our campaigns are actually working or not? And I came back dutifully and said, they're all working to a lesser or greater degree, but and this shows just how green around the gills I was, I said, the most powerful thing in all of these markets seems to be something called WOM. And I said, what exactly is that? And she said, that's word of mouth. There's not a lot we can do about that. Well, of course, we know the world has changed quite considerably. So we've all established, I'm sure by now, that brands drive demand and they create measurable value. Every year we produce a league table of the world's most valuable brands. And the primary purpose of this was really just simply to help businesses understand that these intangible assets were actually useful. And the three things that we look at when we're doing this is quite simply, does the brand enable the owner to create a premium? To what degree does the brand influence choice? And to what degree does the brand create a mechanism whereby you can generate long-term loyalty? If you can generate an earning stream over time, then you'll be a successful company. So we all pretty much accept that now. We also know, instinctively, particularly the group of people in this room, because you've spent many happy years of your working lives doing just this, is that brands drive behaviour. They always have, they always will. They make our lives easier. They enable us to choose between one thing or another. IKEA helps us to understand the way that we live. Disney have taught us how to dream, and Toyota have helped us drive a little better. At one point it wasn't driving quite so well, but they sorted that one out along the way. So we accept these things about the way that brands work. But the way in which brands have to behave is changing quite significantly. Probably the biggest thing that's happened to us all over the last 5 or 10 years was the financial crash. That led to a lot of us questioning our relationships with institutions, not just the financial ones, but all of them. At their heart, what brands do, or what they should do, is provide an element of trust to the purchases that we make, to the alliances that we make, to the things that we follow, to the political parties that we believe in. There is an element of trust to a brand. And some of those foundations were shaken. So there's a job for all of us to be doing to making sure that actually those foundations are strong, that our customers trust us, and they believe in what we're doing. There's a great link back, of course, into shared value and corporate citizenship, which I'll come back to. But before we get there, I want to talk about the sense of what you might call a new consumer consciousness. Now, is it really a new consumer consciousness? Or is it us just having access to a lot more information than we ever had before? Well, many of you, I'm sure, either employ, work with, or are lucky to have, in the form of your children, some millennials running around. Now, the way that that group of people, that age group, think is quite significantly different. And we need to understand this as businesses move forward. And I'll come back to this later on. The third thing, of course, is that we now live in this incredible digital world where brands exist, operate with us in real time. In the old days, it was simply a case of telling people what you wanted them to do, and they went ahead and did it. Well, the world's changed a lot. Indeed, I think we could say that we're entering a new age of demand. The way that demand is created, the way that it is brought together amongst networks of consumers to actually bring to bear upon organisations is quite significantly different from anything that many of us grew up within. This is the way it used to work. You waited there like a dutiful consumer for a wonderful company in some form, way or another to deliver you a message, and you received it gratefully and did your best to obey and consume and conform. Well, we don't really work like that anymore, do we? We live in the land of free hugs, in the land of what we call at Interbrand B and C. The old notions of business to consumer, business to business, carry within it an inherent understanding of how it's supposed to work. We, as the business, tell you what to do, our customer. We communicate to you, we broadcast to you. It doesn't work like that anymore. I grew up in the marketing world in the 1980s and 90s, and we'd still thought like that. And by the time we got to the end of the 90s and into the noughties, we were starting to talk about dialogue. But in truth, all that really meant was that we reluctantly put a response mechanism on things. Nowadays, of course, the customer is ahead of most of us in terms of the way that they are behaving around our products, around our services, and around our brands. They expect experiences. They expect experiences which are seamless and joined up and holistic. And more to the point, they expect to have part of this game for themselves. So if you look at the area down at the bottom there where you've got business overlapping with consumer, there are 3 distinct areas, of course. There's the bit that we still, to a degree, can control. At the end of the day, we do legally own the brand and we can do what we want with it. Whether or not our customers allow us to do is another question. At the other end of the extreme is the consumer's part of the game. Social media. My ability to comment on whether or not I liked a hotel or not on TripAdvisor. In the centre is probably the most exciting space of all, which is the place where it happens together. And there's tremendous opportunity for companies in that area, brands, to genuinely engage in relationships with their customers. It's a very, very different way of thinking if you grew up in a world where you were taught as a marketeer that this was the way you do it. You communicate, you broadcast. And of course, our expectations are driven heavily by those interactions. And increasingly, the experiences that we actually receive really must match what's going on in terms of the experience itself. Because quite simply, we can catch up a lot faster than we ever used to be able to. This is just an example to any of you who work for Hyatt. I'm not picking on you at all. I stay in many Hyatts around the world, but it really does make the point extremely well. Discover the hidden gem of Long Island hotels at our resort-like retreat. Casual, comfortable, contemporary, with a trendy edge. Hyatt Regency Long Island is all that and more. And then, of course, 2.5 milliseconds later, through the joy of Google, indeed not even needing that anymore because I have an app on my phone, I can discover what people say about it on TripAdvisor. We know different, don't we? The Long Island Hyatt Regency is a hotel sadly in need of a room update. Nice structure, nice lobby, but old and faded rooms. I would not stay there again unless they make the investment and refurbish. Good breakfast buffet. Now, you really can't get away with stuff like that for much longer anymore. And I'm sure, like me, you all spend time carefully researching purchases and really trying to understand where you are going to stay on holiday. And of course, there are already people starting to say, but a lot of these hotel owners are actually doing their own postings on TripAdvisor. Well, I don't think it'll be long before the opinions of us, i.e. the real choosers, the real consumers, will be clearly delineated from the things which have been put on by companies. But that's another story. The sources that we actually trust have changed. Now, if you go back to that earlier slide about the importance of trust, well, that's an issue, isn't it? So if customers don't trust us as much as they used to, and the whole financial services collapse, credit crunch, whatever we want to call it, actually triggered us to reappraise, but we don't believe what you're telling us anymore, then actually the fastest way that you can reassure people to trust you is actually not by telling them this yourselves, but actually by encouraging other people to tell them for you. Again, a very different model and a very different way of thinking. Indeed, I think we'd go as far as to say that the way we choose is actually changing almost beyond all recognition. Back in the old days when companies, well, actually, let's even go further back than that. Business commerce started in marketplaces and still happens in marketplaces all around the world, where the buyer and the seller look each other eye to eye and they agree on a price. And you take away that product, and if it works, you go back again. And if it keeps working, you keep going back. Then something funny happened, the emergence of global capitalism, if you want to call it that, really, the emergence of multinational companies and the realization that we could actually dominate, saturate, create markets. And as a consumer, we felt smaller and smaller and smaller. We didn't have that eye-to-eye contact anymore. We didn't have that ability to voice our concerns in such a way that they were genuinely heard. Well, of course, all of that has changed. We now, as individuals, have as much power as any organization. That's a tectonic shift. And for marketers, that's a big thing to get your head around. To recognize really and truly that whatever you tell people, they are much bigger and much more powerful and much more influential than you can possibly hope to be, even if you do spend $3 billion a year like AT&T do on advertising. At the end of the day, a handful of people can call them out or any other organization out. There's no room for messing around with people anymore. You have to be straight, you have to be truthful, and you have to act in good faith. All of this comes back to the notion, really, of being a good corporate citizen. There is no way around it anymore because there is nowhere to hide. Even simply when you look at the way that people actually buy things, this is an adaptation of a rethink, I suppose you might say, on that classic purchase funnel that was actually put together by McKinsey and was in the Harvard Business Review around about a year or so ago. And what it shows is that actually there's a change in the structure of the way that people buy, mainly because of their ability to add new offers or new thoughts into their purchasing process as you go. So if you take something like the car market, back in the day when I started working in the industry, people went into purchasing a car with roughly 3 brands in their head. And then what happened was a simple process of evaluation until such time as you made a decision and you made a purchase. We all were taught models like AIDA and AITA when we were at business school back in the day. It doesn't work like that anymore. So if you look at the way that people buy cars now, and we've done empirical research on this recently, actually the number of brands or models that go into that decision-making process is larger than it ever used to be. But the most interesting thing is that in one study that we did, 70% of the people who were trying to buy ended up buying something that wasn't even in the initial consideration set. Why? Because all the way along that purchase process, there is literally somebody one step ahead of you. You don't have to go and test drive a car anymore. If you know what you want, you can just go on the web, watch somebody else do it. If you know that they've got similar requirements and needs that you have, you can cross it off the list before you even leave your living room. This has massive implications, of course, to all marketers, all brand owners. It also sets up massive opportunity. Because if you know that people are going through that process, why spend tons and tons of cash up front just trying to make sure that you're in the consideration set when actually you know that the process has changed? And the real task is to make sure that you get chosen in the process of purchase. It's a very different way of thinking. Consequently, brands have to start thinking about creating value in a number of different ways. We've always had to innovate, but the sheer number of ideas available to people is increasing exponentially. One of my friends who's head of innovation at a big telco company said, you know, we've got ideas coming from our own people, we've got ideas coming from you guys, we've got our customers sending us stuff, we've got too many ideas now. Now, within that context, of course, large number of ideas, apparent value of ideas drops. The big choice for all of us, of course, is what do we do? And having a strong, clear understanding of what your brand is about, of course, should enable you to make better decisions about where to spend your money. But more importantly nowadays, the innovations that you actually make have to add up to a bigger, stronger understanding of what your brand is about. In particular, we now have very, very high expectations, demands of the companies that we work with in terms of the way the whole experience strings together. And we can thank people like Apple for that. They raised the bar so that the next time you ring your bank up and it's quite obvious that the guys on the call centre are completely disconnected from the people who spoke to you 20 minutes earlier from sales, you're just not willing to accept that anymore. Burberry have done brilliant things in the way that they think about stringing together all of their experiences. This is an image of their flagship store in Regent Street in London. Now, for those of you who actually know Burberry, you will know that there's a huge error in that because their flagship store isn't a store, it's their website. As far as they're concerned, that is the heart of their business. These are simply physical manifestations, temples to their brand, which enable people to experience them in a richer way than they would otherwise be able to do just on the web. Very different way of thinking. And finally, of course, increasingly, companies need to do what they're doing with a clear sense of purpose. Because there's a big shift going on. We've heard about some of these things already. From being business-driven to being purpose-driven, something that P&G has talked about a lot. From being shareholder value-driven to being shared value-driven. And from talking about technological innovation towards social innovation, to be a real player within the communities in which you operate. Now, people have always gravitated towards brands that represent strong ideas. So there's nothing new there, and there's nothing alien, or there's nothing that we need to do to re-educate people. It's the nature of those ideas that matter. It's particularly true nowadays if you do have a higher purchase. And this is just some stats. I'm sure you've seen some similar numbers before. 66% of consumers would prefer to buy products and services from companies that have implemented programs to give back. 53% say that they would pay a premium. Lots of people say they're going to do one thing and obviously do another. We've all experienced that directly. And 51% of consumers say that they would like to be able to reward responsible companies with their business. Now, if this is intentions rather than necessarily action right now, well, there's a number of trends going on in the world which are going to turn this much, 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 much more into action as we move along. We'll take a look at some of those. There is a much greater desire for meaning amongst people within their world. I'm not sure whether that's because we're searching for something bigger or whether we need to understand better about where we fit as individuals within the world. We do live in an increasingly conscious-driven world, and actually in an increasingly conscious world. We are all much more aware, even those people that we heard about earlier on who are younger, less rich or have a lower disposable income, but as well connected almost as the rest of us. This is only going to increase. We are all brutally aware of the effects of global warming, whether we believe it or not, and of indeed the effects of what companies are doing to the world in which we live in and the communities in which we live in. We have, Tom's pops up again, great company, I totally agree. We have a need to participate, and more to the point, we would like to see that the companies that we do business with are participating as well. We want businesses to give back in some way, shape or form, which isn't just about writing a cheque. When we talk to people about corporate citizenship, we talk about corporate citizenship, not about being green or sustainable. It's about what you do as a business. If brands are about assets which touch every part of your business strategy brought to life, well, this works in exactly the same way. And of course, increasingly, it's a part of your brand and the way that people perceive you within the world. And this is the real killer, because it doesn't really matter about what we think. Because the minds that are going to be leading our businesses in less than 10 or 15 years are being taught this every single day in schools around the world by people like Michael Porter. Here he comes again. Shared value is not social responsibility, philanthropy, or even sustainability, but a new way to achieve economic success. Now, if all of those MBAs and all those other guys around the world are being taught this every single day, then it will become true, won't it? Because we all believe the things that we're taught at business school, don't we? Well, some of us do. The point is, it's a movement which is coming up quite significantly in every single country around the world. And we know that it's becoming more important. We did a piece of work, I think it was 4 years ago, trying to put a number on demand in terms of corporate social responsibility. And what we discovered was that that was around about 6 or 7% and moved up or down depending on whether you were looking at business to business or business to consumer. 67% of all revenues triggered by that. That was then. It's only going to get bigger. Starbucks have got back onto the whole notion of a shared planet, had their biggest annual revenues ever just a year and a half ago. 80% of its coffee now ethically sourced. Google, first quarter where they cleared $14 billion of revenue, but actually I think the stat down at the bottom right-hand corner is the most important one. 6 times more millennials wanted to work for Google than for Apple because they believe that their ideas would make a difference. Actually, one of the biggest arguments for being good at this is talent. I'm sure every single one of you has the same issue in every single market you operate in around the world. Getting great people, keeping great people, increasingly has to do with providing an environment in which they feel that they're doing something good, something bigger than just coming to work every single day. We'll try that again. And the financial benefits are measurable. This is just looking at one program in one company. But the Eco-Imagination portfolio has grown from more than 17 products when they started it to more than 110. And in 2011, the revenues directly associated just to the products around that program, over $18 billion a year. It's not an insignificant amount, is it? Which is one of the reasons why we jumped on the whole idea of looking at green brands. And we didn't just want to do another sustainability index or another green index or something else. The original idea came out of a very, very simple conversation with a client where they'd said, hey, look at this data, it's crazy. If you look at what the industry says about us, we're actually fantastic. We're a really good performer. But then you have a look at what our consumers think about us, and we're ranked like 9 or 10. What do we do about that? So we actually built a methodology around that, and in your book it probably says, do you say what you do? And that's what this is really about. We're trying to measure the gap between how good a company actually is, and we work with Deloitte. They look at a whole series of measures from corporate governance through to supply chain, through to product and service. And then we look at the perception within the marketplace. And we're basically saying is that if your perception is better than the reality, you're greenwashing, and watch out. If your performance is actually better than you're perceived, great job, tell people about it, because actually this is an important driver of choice and purchase. So, what have we learned? Well, hopefully, we've learned that the way that we choose is changing, that brands drive behaviour, and actually, increasingly, behaviour drives brands. We now live in the land of B and C and B&B, and we've got to all learn how to co-create and to be social. People don't see a line between real and digital. They simply see brands, holistic, seamless. Those things are no longer privileges. We see them as a right. So if you don't deliver them, beware. Our desire for brands that we trust, who allow us to participate and who bring greater meaning, suggests that corporate citizenship is only going to rise in importance, and that shared value is probably the way forward to achieving economic success. Thank you very much. Now, for those of you who think that I accidentally put a massive, great big QR code up in the corner of my final slide, it's there for a very good reason. You probably all got emails over the last 2 days asking you to fill in a very, very simple survey for us. This is a live thing. We need as many people to take part as possible. We will be telling you the results of that over the next day. I'm not going to tell you exactly what we're looking for because that would give it all away, wouldn't it? But if we do get the QR code back up on there at some point, you can click on that with your mobile phone. If you have it, it'll take you straight to the survey. It takes you less than a couple of minutes, I know, because I've done it myself and I know a lot of other people have. Thank you very much.